This is GARIS Essays, that is 2-3 page opinion pieces on topics such as species dominance, the global state, politics, femtotech, religion, society and education, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. This is essay number 8, part 2. The essay is entitled Seeking the Sputnik moment of AI, Artificial Intelligence. Hugo de GARIS interviews Ben Goertzel on AGI, that's Artificial General Intelligence, Open Cog, and the future of intelligence. And going straight on from part 1, so this is the beginning of part 2. Hugo, do you think humanity will be able to create conscious machines? Ben, absolutely, yes. Hugo, if someone holds a gun to your head and forces you to choose between a godlike intellect coming into existence, but humanity gets destroyed as a result, or the intellect is never created and hence humanity survives, which would you choose and why? Remember the gun at your head. Ben. Well, I guess none of us knows what we'd really do in that sort of situation until we're in it, like in the book Sophie's Choice. But my gut reaction is, I'd choose humanity. As I type these words, the youngest of my 3 kids, my 13-year-old daughter, Shirazada, is sitting a few feet away from me doing her geometry homework and listening to Scriabin Opus Fantasy 28 on her new MacBook Air that my parents got her for Hanukkah. I'm not going to will her death to create a superhuman intellect. Gut feeling, I'd probably sacrifice myself to create a superhuman intellect, but not my kids. I do have huge ambitions and interests going way beyond the human race, but I'm still a human. How about you? What do you reckon you'd choose? Hugo. I vacillate. When I look at the happy people in the park, I feel Terran. When I stare at astronomy books where each little dot is a galaxy in the famous Hubble Deep Field photo, I feel Cosmist. But if I really had to choose, I think I'd choose Cosmist. I think it would be a cosmic tragedy to freeze evolution at our puny human level. This is the biggest and toughest decision humanity will ever have to make. Do we build gods, or do we build our potential exterminators? Ben, well, let's hope we don't have to make that choice. I see no reason why it's impossible to create vastly superhuman minds and even merge with them, while still leaving a corner for the cosmos for legacy humans to continue to exist in all their flawed, monkey-like beauty. Hugo. How do you see humanity's next 100 years? Ben. I guess I largely answered this already, right? I see the creation of superhuman AGI during this century as highly likely. Following that, I see a massive and probably irreducible uncertainty, but I think there's a reasonably high chance that what will happen is ... some superhuman AGIs seeded by our creations will leave our boring little corner of the universe ... some humans will gradually cyborgify themselves into superhuman AGI god minds and probably bid this corner of the cosmos adieu as well ... Some humans will opt to stay legacy humans, and others will opt to be cyborgs of various forms, with various combinations of human and engineered traits ... The legacy humans and weak cyborgs will find their activities regulated by some sort of mildly superhuman nanny AI that prevents too much havoc or destruction from happening. That's my best guess, and I think it would be a pretty nice outcome. But I freely admit I have no strong scientific basis for asserting this is the most probable outcome. There's a hell of a lot of uncertainty about. Hugo. Do you think friendly AI is possible? Can you justify your answer? Ben. Do I think it's possible to create AGI systems with vastly superhuman intelligence that are kind and beneficial to human beings? Absolutely, yes. Do I think it's possible for humans to create vastly superhuman AGI systems that are somehow provably, guaranteeably going to be kind and beneficial to human beings? Absolutely not. It's going to be a matter of biasing the odds. And the better an AIG theory we have, the more intelligently we'll be able to bias the odds. But I doubt we'll be able to get a good AGI theory via pure armchair theorizing. I think we'll get there via an evolving combination of theory and experiment. Experiment meaning building and interacting with early stage proto-AGI systems of various sorts. Hugo, do you see the US or China being the dominant AI researcher nation in the coming decades? Ben, I think I'll have to answer that question from two perspectives. A general one, setting aside my considerations related to my own AGI work in particular, and a personal one in terms of the outlook for my own AGI project. Generally speaking, my view is that the US has a humongous lead over anywhere else in terms of AGI research. It's the only country with a moderate-sized community of serious researchers who are building serious, practical AGI architectures aimed at the grand goal of human-level intelligence and beyond. Second place is Europe, not China or India, not even Korea or Japan. The AGI conference series that I co-founded operates every alternate year in the US and every alternate year elsewhere. The AAAI, the strongest narrow AI professional organization in the world, is international in scope, but US founded and to a significant extent still US focused. The US also has by far the world's best framework for technology transfer, for taking technology out of the lab and into the real world. That's important because once AGI development reaches a certain point, tech transfer will allow its further development to be funded by the business sector, which has a lot of money. And this kind of thing is hard for other countries to replicate because it involves a complex ecosystem of interactions between companies of various sizes, universities, and investors of various sorts. It's even hard for cities in the US, outside a certain number of tech hubs, to pull off effectively. Also, most probably the first powerful AGIs will require a massive server farm. And who's best at doing that? US companies like Google and Amazon and IBM, right? China may have built the world's fastest supercomputer recently, but that's sort of an irrelevancy, because the world doesn't really need supercomputers anymore. What we really need are massive distributed server farms, like the ones operated with such stunningly low cost and high efficiency by America's huge internet companies. And culturally, the US has more of a culture of innovation and creativity than anywhere else. I know you lived for a while in Utah, which has its pluses, but is a very unusual corner of the US. But if you go to any of the major cities or tech hubs, or even a lot of out-of-the-way college towns, you'll see a spirit of enthusiastic new idea generation among young adults that is just unmatched anywhere else on the planet. Also, a spirit of teamwork that leads a group of friends just out of college to start a software company together, cooperating informally outside the scope of any institution or bureaucracy. Look at any list of the most exciting tech companies or the biggest scientific breakthroughs in the last few years, and while it will look pretty international, you'll see a lot of US there. Many of the US scientists and technologists will have non-Anglo-Saxon sounding names, including many that are Chinese or Indian, but that's part of the US's power. Many of the best students and scientists come from around the world come to America to study, to teach, or do research, or start companies, etc. That's how the US rose to science and engineering prominence in the first place, not through descendants of the Puritans, but through much more recent immigrants. My great-grandparents were Eastern European Jews who immigrated to the US in the first couple of decades of the last century. They were farmers and shopkeepers in Europe, but now their descendants are scientists and professors, executives and teachers, etc. This is the same sort of story that's now bringing so many brilliant Asians to America to push science and technology forward. So hey, God bless America, what more can I say? Not many people know that I live near Washington, D.C. A lot of people assume I'm from California for some reason. Actually, that's changed. Ben's been living for years now in Hong Kong. I've lived in a lot of places: Brazil, Oregon, New Jersey, Philly, 4 or 5 boroughs of New York City, Australia, New Zealand, New Mexico, but never California, not yet at any rate. Though my companies Novamente and BioMind have had plenty of customers there, and I'd become painfully accustomed to the red-eye flights from DC to San Fran and LA. As you know, I live in Maryland, just north of DC. He did live. A few miles from the National Institutes of Health, for which I've done a lot of bioinformatics work. And I've also done some AI consulting for various companies working with other government agencies. I've become a bit of a beltway bandit since I moved here in 2003. DC has its pluses and minuses, and I wouldn't say I fit into the culture here too naturally, but there's a lot more interesting R&D going on here than most people realize, because the culture here isn't publicity oriented. And in some ways there's a longer term focus here than one finds in Silicon Valley, where there's so much obsession with moving super fast and getting profits or cash flow or eyeballs or whatever as quickly as possible. The Chinese government thinks 30 years ahead, one of its major advantages compared to the US, I might add. Wall Street thinks a quarter ahead. Silicon Valley thinks maybe 3 years ahead. Bay Area VCs typically only want to invest in startups that have some kind of exit strategy within 3 years or so. And they usually push you pretty hard to launch your product within 6 months of funding, a default mode of operation which is an awkward fit for a project like building AGI. And DC is somewhere between Silicon Valley and China. But still, having said all that, there's always another side to the coin, right? On the other hand, if the US manages to squander these huge advantages during the next few decades via pushing all its funding and focus on other stuff besides AGI and closely allied technologies, then who knows what will happen. Economically, China and India are gradually catching up to the US, and Europe and Korea and Japan. They're gradually urbanizing and educating and modernizing their huge rural populations. And eventually China will probably adopt some sort of Western-style democracy with free press and all that good stuff. And that will probably help Chinese culture to move further in the direction of free expression and informal teamwork and encouragement of individual creativity, things that I think are extremely important for fostering progress in frontier areas like AGI, that's Artificial General Intelligence. And eventually India will overcome its patterns of corruption and confusion and become a first world country as well. And when these advantages happen in Asia, then maybe we'll see a more balanced pattern of emigration, where as many smart students move from the US to Asia as vice versa. If the advent of AGI is delayed till that point, we're talking maybe 2040 or so, I would reckon, then maybe China or India is where the great breakthrough will happen. I do think China is probably going to advance beyond the US in several areas in the next couple of decades. They're far, far better at cheaply making massive infrastructure improvements than we are. And they're putting way more effort and brilliance into energy innovations than we are, to name just two examples. And then there's stem cell research, where the US still has more sophistication, but China has fewer regulatory slowdowns, and other areas of biomedical research where they excel. But these areas are largely to do with building big stuff or doing a lot of experimentation. I think the Chinese can move ahead in this sort of area more easily than in something like AGI research. I think AGI research depends mostly on the closely coordinated activity of small informal and semi-formal groups of people pursuing oddball ideas, and I don't think this is what Chinese culture and institutions are currently best at fostering. Another factor acting against the US is that the US AI research community, along with its research funding agency, is largely mired in some unproductive ideas, the result of the long legacy of US AI research. And it's true that the Chinese research community and research funders aren't similarly conceptually constricted. They have fewer unproductive conceptual biases than the US AI researchers on the whole. But if you look at the details, what most Chinese academics seem to care about most about these days is publishing papers in SCI index journals and getting their citation counts higher. And the way to do this is definitely not to pursue long-term oddball speculative AGI research. You might be able to frame an interesting argument in favour of India as a future AGI research centre on this basis. They seem a bit less obsessed with citation counts than the Chinese, and they have a long history of creative thinking about mind and consciousness, even longer than the Chinese. Modern consciousness studies could learn a lot from some of the medieval Indian Buddhist logicians. Plus, a lot of Silicon Valley's high-tech expertise is getting outsourced to Bangalore, and the IITs, that's India Institute of Technology, sort of the equivalent of MIT, and the IITs are more analogous to top-flight US technical universities, for example MIT or Caltech, than anything in China, though Chinese universities also have their strengths. But anyway, this is just wild speculation, right? For now, there's no doubt that the practical nexus of AGI research remains in America, in spite of lots of great work being done in Germany and other places. AGI leadership is America's to lose, and it may well lose it, time will tell. Or America-based AGI research may advance sufficiently fast that nobody else has time to catch up. ... Hugo, okay, that was your general answer. Now what about your personal answer? I know you've been spending a lot of time in China lately, and you're working with students at Xiamen University in the lab I ran there before I retired. In other words, got fired. Will I go into that? I've said it many other times in other flyers. Okay, just quickly. I was trying to persuade my university's president to make Xiamen, the city we both live in, to be the artificial brain center of China. But I told him that very few Western professors and researchers would want to come to China until China democratizes, because they know about things like that Mao Zedong killed about 80 million Chinese, and China has about 1,000 Laogai, concentration camps with political prisoners. China has about 3 to 5 million political prisoners today, and so forth. Censorship of the internet, and so in other words, China is still pretty much a political shithole. So large numbers of Westerners won't want to come to a Chinese artificial brain center. And a few months, and then he emailed me back saying I'd broken the law. And a few months later, my contract is not renewed. So effectively, I got fired. Anyway. Back to the flyer. I know you've been, to my question to Ben Goertzel, I know you've been spending a lot of time in China lately, and you're working with students at Xiamen University in the lab I ran there before I retired, haha, as well as with a team in Hong Kong. Ben, yeah, that was my general answer. Now I'll give my personal answer, that is, my answer based on my faith in my own AGI project. I think that the Open Cog, this sort of open cognition project, which I co-founded, is on an R&D path that has a fairly high probability of leading to human-level general intelligence, and then beyond. Wow. I mean, listen to that. High probability of leading to human-level general intelligence, and then beyond. The basic ideas are already laid out in some fairly careful and voluminous writing. Ben's probably referring to his 2-volume book called Building General Intelligence. Yeah, look it up on Amazon. Building General Intelligence, Ben Goertzel. And we have a code base that already functions and implements some core parts of the design, and a great team of brilliant AGI enthusiasts who understand the vision and the details. So if my faith in OpenCog is correct, then the US versus China question becomes partly a question of whether OpenCog gets developed in the US or China. Interestingly, it seems the answer is probably going to be both, and other places too. It's an open source project with collaborators from all over the place. My company, Novamente, I think that's Spanish for new mind. I don't speak Spanish. My company, Novamente LLC, limited liability company, is driving part, although by no means all, of OpenCog development, and we have some programmers in the US contributing to OpenCog based on US government contracts, which are for narrow AI projects that use OpenCog rather than for AGI per se, as well as a key AGI researcher in Bulgaria and some great AI programmers in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, whom I've been working with since 1998. There's also a project at Hong Kong Polytechnic University, co-sponsored by the Hong Kong government's Innovation in Technology Fund and Novamente LLC, which is applying OpenCog to create intelligent game characters. And there's a handful of students at Xiamen University in China working on making a computer vision front end for OpenCog based on Itamar Arel's Destin that's D-E-S-T-I-N, Destin system. Note that Itamar is from Israel, but currently working in the US as a prof at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, as well as CTO of a Silicon Valley software company, Binatix, B-I-N-A-T-I-X. Now, the AI programmers on the Hong Kong project consist of two guys from New Zealand, including Dr. Joel, J-O-E-L, Pitt, P-A-T-T, the technical lead on the project, and also 3 exchange students from Xiamen University. In April, which year are we talking about? This is rather an old flyer. In April, I'll be spending a few weeks in Hong Kong with the team there, along with Dr. Joshua Buck from Germany. My point in recounting all these boring details about people and places is maybe your question is just too 20th century. Maybe AGI won't be developed in any particular place, but rather on the interwebs, making use of the strengths of the US as well as the strength of China, Europe, Brazil, New Zealand, and so on and so forth. Or maybe the US or Chinese government will decide OpenCog is the golden path to AGI and throw massive funding at us, and we'll end up relocating the team in one location. It's certainly possible. We're open to all offers, and that will allow us to keep our code open source. So far, I have found the Chinese research funding establishment and the Chinese university system to be much more open to radical new approaches to AGI research than their American analogues. In part, this is just because they have a lot less experience with AI in general, whether narrow AI or AGI, G for general. They don't have any preconceived notions about what might work, and they don't have such an elaborate AI brain trust of respected older professors at famous universities with strong opinions about which AGI approaches are worthwhile and which are not. I've gotten to know the leaders of the Chinese AI research community, and they're much more receptive to radical AGI thinking than their American colleagues. Zhongzhi Shi, or in the Chinese order, the family name would be Shi, and his personal name Zhongzhi, that's Z-H-O-N-G, Z-H-I, so Zhongzhi, from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, is going to come speak about Chinese AGI efforts at the AGI 11. So I'm talking about the year, Ben was writing this in the year 2011, so 6 years ago as I speak, at the AGI 11 conference in California in August. And I've also had some great conversations with your friend Yixin Zhang, or Zhang Yixin, who's the head of the Chinese AI Association. I went to their conference last year in Beijing, and as you'll recall, our joint paper on our work with intelligent robots in Xiamen won the Best Paper Prize. No, I didn't know that. At the moment, their efforts are reasonably well funded, but not to the level of Chinese work on semiconductors or supercomputers or wind power or stem cell research, etc., etc. But certainly, I can see a possible future where some higher-ups in the Chinese government decide to put a massive amount of money into intelligent robotics or some other AGI application, enough to tempt a critical mass of Western AGI researchers, as well as attract a lot of top Chinese students. If that does happen, we could well see the world's AGI Sputnik occur in China. And if this happens, it will be interesting to see how the US government responds. Will it choose to fund AGI research in a more innovation-friendly way than it's done in the past? Or will it respond by more and more aggressively funding the same handful of universities and research paradigms it's been funding since the 1970s? So overall, putting my general and personal answers together, I feel like, in the broad scope, the AGI R&D community is much stronger in the US than anywhere else, and definitely much, much stronger than in China. On the other hand, AGI is the sort of thing where one small team with the right idea can make the big breakthrough. So it's entirely possible this big breakthrough could occur outside the US, either via natively grown ideas or via some other country like China offering a favourable home to some American-originated AGI project like OpenCog that's too radical in its conceptual foundations to fully win the heart of the US AI research funding establishment. So in other words, Ben Goertzel was a maverick. But ultimately, that's me saying that in 2017. But ultimately, I see the development of AGI in an international context as providing higher odds of a beneficial outcome than if it's exclusively owned and developed in any one nation. So as well as being an effective way to get work done, I think the international open source modality we're using for OpenCog is ultimately the most ethically beneficial way to do AGI development. Well, what do you think? You live in China. I spent a lot of time there in recent years and plan to spend a few months there this year, but not as much as you. And you speak the language. I don't. Actually, I don't speak the language. I never really bothered to learn Chinese. I have such a low regard for China, and in a year or two I'll leave anyway. That's me ad-libbing in 2017. Do you think I'm missing any significant factors in my analysis? Hugo. I put more emphasis on Chinese economics and national energy. Americans have become fat and complacent and are not growing economically at anywhere near the Chinese rate. The historical average US economic growth rate is 3%, whereas China's is 10%. Remember this is 2011 when I wrote this, and has been sustained pretty much for 30 years. Doing the math, if this incredible energy of the Chinese can be sustained for a few more decades, it will put the rich eastern Chinese cities at a living standard well above that of the US, in which case they can afford to attract the best and most creative human brains in the world to come to China. The US will then see a reverse brain drain as its best talent move to where it's at, namely China. With 1 million talent Westerners in China within a decade, they will bring their top world minds with them and shake up China profoundly, modernizing it, legalizing it, democratizing it, and civilizing it. Once China finally goes democratic, and with its rich salaries, it doesn't matter whether the Chinese can be creative or not. The presence of the best non-Chinese brains in China will ensure an explosion of creativity in that part of the world. Ben. Chinese economic growth is indeed impressive, but of course it's easier to grow when you're urbanizing and modernizing a huge rural population. To an extent, the US and Europe and Japan are growing more slowly simply because they're already urbanized and modernized. I guess once China and India have finished modernizing, their growth rates may look like those in the rest of the world, right? Question mark. So your projection that Chinese growth will make Chinese cities richer than US cities may be off base, because most of Chinese growth has to do with bringing more and more poor people up to the level of the international middle class. But I guess that's a side point, really. About creativity, actually, I know many fantastically creative Chinese people, including some working on OpenCog, and I guess you do too. What seems more lacking in China is a mature ecosystem for turning wacky creative ideas into novel, functional, practical realizations. I'm sure that will come to China eventually, but it requires much more than importing foreigners. It may require some cultural shifts as well. And it's hard to estimate the pace at which those may happen. But China does have the capability to turn on a dime when it wants to, so who knows. About Americans being fat and complacent, well, I'm a little heavier than I was 20 years ago, but I haven't become a big fat capitalist pig yet, and I don't consider myself all that complacent. Generalizations are dangerous, I guess. Silicon Valley, New York, DC, Boston, Seattle, LA, there's a lot of energy in a lot of US cities, a lot of diversity and a lot of striving and energy. But yeah, I see what you mean. America does sort of take for granted that it's on top, whereas China has more of an edge these days, as if people are pushing extra hard because they know they're coming from behind. Look at the San Fran Bay area as an example. Sometimes the Silicon Valley tech scene seems a bit tired lately, churning out one cookie-cutter Web 2.0 startup after another. But then the Shanghai startup scene is largely founded on churning out Chinese imitations of Silicon Valley companies. And then you have some really innovative stuff going on in San Fran alongside the Web 2.0 copycat companies like Halcyon Molecular, aiming at super cheap DNA sequencing, or Binatics or Vicarious Systems, deep learning based perception processing, aiming towards general intelligence. You don't have a lot of startups in China with that level of mad science going on in them, at least not at this point. So there's a lot of complexity in both the US and China, and it's far from clear how it will all pan out, which is one reason I'm happy OpenCog isn't tied to one city or country. Of course, ... Hugo. Can you list the dominant few ideas in your new book, Building Better Minds? That book was retitled, I think, Building General Intelligence. I mentioned that before in this flyer, so Amazon it. Go to Amazon. Ben. Uh-oh, a hard question. It was more fun blathering about politics. That book, which is almost done now, so it's now done, as of several years ago,